Call this meeting to order. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Please be seated. Okay, before we get started, for everyone's information, Supervisor Bittinger is heading back a little late from a meeting in Des Moines, so he is on the phone. Also yesterday, Building Services Director Kenny Schmitz asked me if two gentlemen could potentially call in for the item on 28th Street, and I said yes. So on the line is Shane Albrecht with the Baker Group, and if needed, another one may be asked to call in at that time. You still with us, Dan?
Yes, I'm here.
All right.
How it works is
First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. I'll move it.
what they've done is
Second?
Second by Bittinger. Hearing no discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Taylor.
I'll be voting against the agenda simply because an item that I put on as information, or action actually, was changed to information, not allowing a vote. So just wanted to explain that to the public. Thank you.
Very well.
That was in the bylaws. That's according to the bylaws.
It's allowable. I'm just stating my reason for not voting for it. Not saying that there's anything untoward.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. Passes 4-1. Taylor opposed. Items 2 through 7 constitute a consent agenda of routine action items to be considered by one motion. Items pass unanimously unless a separate vote is requested by a board member. Item 2 is approval of the minutes of the April 23rd meeting and approval of the minutes of the April 19th special meeting. Item 3 is approval of the claims. Item 4 from Human Resources is approval of the memorandum of personnel transactions. Item 5 from Board Administration is to set the public hearing for the FY24 Budget Amendment Number 1 for May 28th at 4:45 p.m. Item 6 from the Board of Supervisors is approval of resolution to appoint Patrick Gill as representative of the Northwest Iowa Regional Housing Authority. Item 7 from Secondary Roads is to approve the underground utility permit for FAR Technologies and Quick Broadband LLC and to direct the chair to sign the permit. I'll move the consent agenda if there are no questions. Second by Taylor. Hearing no discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay.
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Okay, we're just about at our 4:35 p.m. set time, so we'll skip ahead to item 9. This is the public hearing and sale of property parcel, also known as 4103 Gordon Drive. I believe this is a direct property sale. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. So the public hearing is now open, as it always is on these sales, for anyone to speak for or against the sale of this property. Hearing none, I'll move the public hearing be closed.
Second?
Second by Taylor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay.
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Now we're receiving bids for this property, but it is a direct sale for $398 to the city of Sioux City, plus recording fees. Correct, Heather? Yep, correct. Okay, based upon the attached resolution, I will move that.
Second.
Second by Nelson. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Congratulations, Sioux City. You just bought yourself a piece of property. Please see Heather. Item 9B is our 4:36 p.m. set time. This is a public hearing and sale of property parcel, also known as 204.5 Kansas Street. Before we receive bids, the public hearing is now open for anyone who wishes to speak for or against the sale of this property. Is there anyone to speak?
Hearing none, Mr. Chair, I move that the public hearing be closed.
Second.
Motion by Taylor, second by Nelson, to close the public hearing. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. We're now receiving bids for this property on Kansas Street for anyone who would like to approach and give their opening bid. Name and address.
My little paper here says, anyhow, I thought the opening bid was $100 or some such thing like that, so,
Yes, sir.
yeah.
All right. Did you give your name and
What was your name?
address?
My name is Dennis Benson.
Okay. Is there anyone else to bid on this property? Going once, going twice. I'll move the property be sold to Dennis Benson for $100 plus recording fees.
Second.
Second by Nelson. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Thank you. At this point, we're a little bit ahead of our 4:40 PM set time. Mark Nair, how long do you think your items will take? A couple minutes or? That's, okay. We'll go back to item 8 from secondary roads. A is approval to accept the dump truck quotes and return them to the county engineer for an award recommendation.
Last week, we had 2 dump truck quotes that were sent to the wrong office and weren't discovered until after the meeting. They were delivered on time. The bids were not labeled. They were just sent to the Woodbury County Courthouse. I consulted with Joshua Widman. It's within our purview to go ahead and open these bids and give them consideration. They're from Boyer Trucks, which has been a long-term supplier of large trucks to our department. So, opening the first one for the tandem axle. Total bid price, $278,756. And they note that if this lapses into next model year, there will be a $4,000 price increase. There is no offer on the trade. That was for the tandem. The next one is for the single axle. Total bid price, $202,921. Trade-in on unit 503, $14,900. Net purchase price, $195,021. It's my recommendation that the board receive the bids and return them to be added to the other bids for review by the county engineer.
Second the motion by Radig. Any questions? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item B is approval of letter of financial support for the federal aid grant application for the South Bridge Interchange Project and direct chair to sign the letter.
Actually, we want all 5 board members to sign that are available tonight. This is the letter guaranteeing the board's financial support for the interchange construction. Based on the current set of plans, the cost estimate for the project is now $21,489, or $489,824. We've already received a grant from Simcoe. The rural and infra grant application that this letter supports is for $893,895. That is 60% of the total project cost, which is the maximum available under infra. They both have to be submitted at the same price for consideration under both programs. This would reduce the county TIF funding on the project to $6,565,930 would be the way it would net as we get down through everything. This includes the work at the railroad crossing, which is a little over $1 million in the total project work. That will include signals and cross arms, along with a traffic light there that would have preemption so that trucks and traffic can be cleared before the train approaches. So it would then stop traffic on Old 75 so the traffic could be cleared that might be in conflict with an approaching train. So the application is due Monday at the latest.
I'll move the approval.
I'll second the motion by Raddick. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you. The message is in your, or the letter is in your signature package. Will Supervisor Bittinger be available
Yep.
today yet?
Yep.
Great, thank you.
All right, we'll move on to item 10 from Planning and Zoning. Mr. Daniel Priestley, we need to skip items A and B and move to C, which is our 4:40 PM set time. This is a public hearing to consider zoning ordinance text amendments to the floodplain management ordinance in the zoning ordinance section 503 before we approve the second reading of the ordinance. So are there any, is there anyone to speak during the public hearing or questions for our zoning director?
Hearing none, Mr. Chair, I move that the public hearing be closed.
I'll second the motion by Taylor. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Passes 5-0. Then item D is to approve the second reading of the ordinance. Do you have anything to add from last week?
I have nothing to add, just one little announcement up on Beacon. The draft floodplain maps are now available for the public to compare the floodplains.
Okay. Everyone live streaming, go straight to your computers and hit refresh. I know you're on the page.
I'll move the second reading.
I'll second the motion by Raddick. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Passes 5-0. Item E is our 4:42 PM set time. This is to conduct the second public hearing for the consideration of the proposed Woodbury County Comprehensive Plan 2040 before we approve the second reading. Public hearing is now open for anyone who wishes to speak. Seeing none, I'll move the public hearing be closed.
Second.
Second by Nelson. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Passes 5-0. Item F then is to approve the second reading of the comprehensive plan. I'll move it.
Second.
Second by Nelson. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Passes 5-0. Thank you. We have a little bit of a gap before our 4:50 PM set time because I believe we thought that we would be having our budget certification set time on time, but as mentioned in a prior week, one of the county papers did not publish when they told us they were going to, so we had to delay that to May 7th. So we'll move back to item 10A, which is to receive the final report and the zoning commission's recommendation from their April 22nd meeting to approve the final plat of Yawkey Farm Addition, a minor subdivision in Woodbury County.
Yes, the zoning commission, of course, sends their recommendation. The application looked in order. This is just south of Anthon, and the city of Anthon waived their extraterritorial review.
I'll move to receive.
Second.
Second by Taylor. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Passes 5-0. Item D is approval of resolution of the Yawkey Farm Addition, a minor subdivision to Woodbury County.
I'll move approval.
I'll second the motion by Raddick. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Passes 5-0. We can move on to, it would be discussion of item H to approve the second reading of the ordinance and allow anyone here to speak ahead of our 4:50 PM set time. So is there anyone here to speak on the public hearing to consider zoning ordinance text amendments for utility scale energy systems, conditional use in the general industrial zoning district, including to add a new section 5.08, amend the table of contents, and renumber the ordinance page numbers to accommodate the addition of the new section? Or do you have any summarizing comments for us, Dan?
Not much to add from last week. That this ordinance is basically added feature status quo from the permitting of solar in the general industrial areas in particular. The zoning commission, of course, went through 8 public meetings, 2 work sessions, and 6 public hearings to come to the conclusion after looking at all the information before them. And they centered in on the general industrial being appropriate location. And this language also includes a decommissioning plan and various other road use agreements and things with potential developers within the industrial areas. So, and it also includes the Board of Supervisors in the permitting process as well for the building permit aspect of it. Otherwise, it's the Zoning Commission, Board of Adjustment, and Board of Supervisors.
Questions for Dan?
Thanks for all your work on this. I know it's been a process and quite a bit of time, so.
Most of the time.
Any public comment on this? How many meetings was it, you said, Mr. Nelson?
Well, they had 8, but then we had 2 public hearings before, then we've had 2 more, so by my simple math, that's 14.
We have to have 3 public hearings. All right. We'll go ahead with our 4:50 PM set time. Item G, hearing none to speak during the public hearing. I'll move the public hearing be closed.
Second.
Second by Nelson. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item H is to approve the second reading of the ordinance. I'll move it.
Second.
Second by Nelson. Hearing no discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay.
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Thank you. Item 11 from WCICC CIO John Malloy is approval to spend WCICC-IT FY25 CIP dollars.
Lots of acronyms.
King of acronyms.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman. Yes, again, I view as a procedural motion so we can begin our fiscal year 25 projects with an eye on our PC replacement that'll be starting up this summer.
Any questions?
I would move it.
I'll second the motion by Taylor. Hearing no discussion. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 12 from Building Services, Director Kenny Schmitz, includes A, approval of FY 2023 CIP in the amount of $127,933.84. Shane Albrecht, are you still on the phone?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn it over to Kenny to introduce the item.
Kenny Schmitz, Building Services Director. Sioux City Engineering Company has submitted their final payment for the 28th Street paving project. Sioux City Engineering Department has reviewed those documents and the pay app. Gordon Fair with the city is here with us tonight. So this will finish out this project and we'll be glad to get it off our plate. It's been a long one. We're asking to approve change orders 4, 5, and the final pay application 13. I'm also asking to approve $127,933.84. Additionally, it was requested for year 2023 CIP. Dennis, our finance director, had some different ideas after I had submitted this agenda item, and I believe he'd like to request that we move that for year 2025. Dennis?
Okay, what we're proposing to move in the 24 to 25
CIP year is the tuck pointing of the emergency service building. There's been no bids yet, there's no movement to go ahead with this yet. So we're pushing this project, with you guys' permission, to next fiscal year CIP, freeing that money up in the current year here. We'll borrow the money for this emergency service, we'll free up the money this year to pay for the balance of the 28th Street, get this out of our hair.
So what this does, in a bigger picture, what this does for us is, you know, we track our CIP projects over a 5-year revolving account, if you want to call it that. This is basically a shuffling or a reshuffling that we do continually. That's done so we can finish out the earlier year CIPs, for instance, for years 21, for years 22, get those years off the books. It helps us track our numbers and our finance on each project through each year a lot easier if we can drop off those earlier years. So again, we're asking for a motion for 127,933.84 out of year 2025 CIP. And second motion to approve change orders 4 and 5 for Sioux City Engineering and their final contract pay application 13, which is $238,712.24.
We have a question, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I originally remember the number 210,000 being bandied about when we talked, I think it was 4 months ago. And am I to understand now that the entirety is around 365,000? Because if you had the 238 and the 127, am I tracking this right, or am I misreading this? I mean, are we putting 127,933 additionally?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a $365,000 expense. Am I tracking this correctly, or am I?
I have to see, I don't have that figure to pull.
Well, it says the final contract amount is
Pull from.
238,712.
Okay.
And we were pulling the 127 out of CIP, so the final contract amount's the 238 still.
That's correct. That's the final
Yeah,
contract.
it's not
payment.
238 plus
Okay.
127.
So 127 we're pulling from CIP.
For year 2025, yes.
Okay.
And the rest is pulled from our other previous CIP account.
Did we have that money dedicated, Dennis?
127,000?
Right, we had that for the tuck pointing, essentially. We're putting that off so that we can expend that much more.
But I guess I have a question about that, because we approved a bid for that, for Climbing Hill. That was supposed to be done this spring.
It's not going to get done this spring unless somebody else has already initiated that contract.
Yeah, we had approved it here, and then Director Mitchell had gotten back to them, and they were gonna do it this spring.
Yeah, I remember us doing
And I'm
that.
trying, I don't know whether the internet or the cell service isn't working, so I can't pull up the contract, but yeah, we had passed that here, and initiated that for this spring.
Okay. Dennis?
If that's the case, then, Mark, then we will use that 127 this year. We'll use the 127 this year for the tuck point, then we'll put the 127 that we need here in our fiscal year 25 CIP.
That's what I would
We can
recommend.
go ahead and pay the bill, just run the red, knowing the money will come through about May next year.
Yeah,
And there may be other funds and projects that are dedicated this year that may have money left over where we may not even have to borrow the money. Time will tell by the end of the year.
So did we originally set to borrow 238,712 toward
I
this?
don't think we knew the bar, did we?
No, we didn't know the bar.
No.
This is, when we get into questions like this, I may ask Gordon to come up, because we're now talking about the project, how it's bid, and how it's paid. It's all bid and paid through line items within the contract that are based on quantities that change. Quantities change on the amount of material that you use, and A lot of those are unknowns until you're actually into the project. Gordon, would you like to explain that quickly?
Yes, Gordon Fair, city engineer for Sioux City. For instance, what Kenny was saying is, such the paving was a big number, that the plan showed X amount of square footage or square yards of paving, and it ended up being a much larger amount. So you didn't know that until actually when the project was actually finished. So that's just one of the examples.
So I originally heard something like 210 and it's 238, so that doesn't seem that very far off.
Yeah, after final counting,
Yeah.
I had my inspector go out there, take actual measurements of pavement, the striping, some pipe measurements, things like that, all of the, not all of the bid items, but many of the bid items. And these are the final numbers.
And my last question relates to the borrow. We've bonded in this project for $50.3 million. We're borrowing, in this instance, another 238. Is this seen, this is kind of for you, Joshua, as a separate project altogether? The contribution of borrowing toward this road that we know without it wouldn't be but for the law enforcement center, or is this clean enough?
This is totally a separate project.
Yeah, but from our standpoint, because we borrowed that limitation, I just want to make sure that that's the case.
So ask me that one more time. if you
Yep.
would.
So we borrowed $50.3 million toward the law enforcement center. We've spent much more than that, but through non-borrowed funds. These are borrowed funds that are essentially in support of the law enforcement center. Is this separate enough that it's not considered borrowing in excess of that bond?
I think early on, they were separated out into, while they're related projects, they're separate. So I don't think that the 28th Street falls under the cap that's applicable to the improvements that are actually on the site of LEC.
Okay, thank you.
So back to the building services, and I'll forward you this email, but I do have an email from Director Scott at the time that he had confirmed that he'd signed the bid and sent it back to MidCon. And I'll forward that to you just to make sure you have it, Kenny. But
Okay,
they thought sometime this spring, so we'll have to get in touch with them and see what they're
Okay.
thinking, so. Yeah. And thanks for the clarification on that.
Any other discussion?
Move item A.
I'll second the motion by Radig. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item 12B is approval of Sioux City Engineering Company change orders number 4, 5, and the final contract pay application number 13 in the amount of $238,712.24.
I'll move the final payment of the contract.
Second the motion by Radig. Any discussion? Shane, did you have anything you were calling in specifically for, or just in case we had questions?
Just in case you had questions, Matthew.
Okay,
Can I just ask for a point of clarification?
sure.
So I see on the agenda in the backup, motion to approve the $127,933, motion to approve the 238, and then on another item, motion to approve $190,113. Am I missing something? The wording for the agenda item is 28th Street paving project? I'm just, I don't know if there were three motions that were intended and one didn't make its way on the,
Kenny, what did
Agenda.
you intend with the number of motions?
there were two motions. Just the two that you've entertained.
do you see where I'm
So
looking?
Where's the 190 at, Jeremy? Let's see.
It says 28th Street paving project. I don't know if that's,
The motion includes 2 change orders and final.
okay, I guess this is backup from another, must be backup from another item. I guess that's from an earlier date, it just must have made its way into the backup, so, thank you.
Anything else, Kenny?
No, thank you.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Passes 5-0. Thank you. Kenny, would you mind also handing that back to Mr. Nero?
Okay.
I'll get this to you. All right, next item is 13 from the Board of Supervisors, myself for information. This is presentation of missing context related to Supervisor Taylor's following items and the harmful impact caused by a lack of patience, causing incomplete information being conveyed to the public about the Law Enforcement Center's property insurance premium. To preface this, we all know we have an echo in this room. We all know that we have a moving target with the substantial completion date, and Human Resources did secure a quote related to this premium. Unfortunately, the public perception that was left after the agenda item last Tuesday was that there was no budget answer, essentially, and that we were in a place where we needed to make some immediate changes for the budget certification coming up. And I don't think that's accurate, and I think that was easily avoided because the issue can be boiled down to FY '24 versus '25. And so I'm going to read an email that I sent to our budget director, Dennis Butler, on Thursday, April 25th in the morning. It's reproduced with his permission, and the purpose of this was to document my conversation with him and to shed some light on what I say is missing context. So I said, Dennis, you explained to me the budgeting process for paying for the new Law Enforcement Center's property insurance. Gallagher provided a $177,000 annual quote. Initially, when the LAC Authority estimated a completion date before July 1, 2024, we thought this might be due within FY '24's current budget, which would be funded out of reserves, and that's why you accurately and publicly said we don't have the money in the budget. At that point, our main option would be to fund it out of reserves. A week or two later, the LAC Authority revised their estimated completion date to be after July 1st, 2024, and this was significant because it meant the premium would certainly be due in next year's FY '25 budget rather than FY '24. Per Gallagher, the insurance would not go into effect until there is an occupancy certificate, and the initial quarterly payment would be due within 30 days of binding. Following this change in the estimated completion date, you told me your plan became to fund this insurance premium through the self-liability fund. For FY '25, you recommended, and the board has already received, an increase in that FY '25 budget from $1 million to $1.4 million. While decreasing the countywide tax rate, this board has thus far allocated an additional $400,000 to this line item, which will pay for the $177,000 insurance premium. I'll just add here that it doesn't particularly matter which line item funds an unanticipated expense in FY '25 when you consider the fact that we cannot at this point increase our levy. We have the certification coming up next Tuesday, and so I'm speaking out on behalf of the public that was concerned about there being this uncertainty when really there is not. And unfortunately, this was avoidable. All of this is planning based upon a quote and an estimated completion date rather than a confirmed bill and a confirmed completion date. Well, it would have been a priority consideration if due in FY '24, knowing it is fully funded out of the FY '25 budget means other budget items took priority as we are approaching the final certification of the FY '25 budget. Before the April 23rd meeting, I told Supervisor Taylor that you desired to be present during the April 30th meeting to discuss his agenda item regarding reallocating funding to pay for this premium. And I asked if he would be willing to wait until you, our budget director, was present. Instead of waiting 1 week for you to return from medical leave, he insisted that his item be presented on April 23rd, and so it was. Knowing all this leads me to ask you a question. Between your plans to shift from funding via FY24 reserves to FY25's already increased insurance budget, did Supervisor Taylor ask you for input or advice? And Dennis Butler's response to me was no, he did not discuss FY25 with me. Unfortunately, I feel like bringing this up is the only way to clarify the missing context last week that resulted in some unfortunate public perception of this item and resulted in Mr. Taylor telling the media, you know, didn't think what the board is doing is right. When it shifts from a FY24 expense to an FY25, which happened in the span of within the last month, that completely changes the board's discussion, or should change the board's discussion. If we need to come up with the money in the current fiscal year, we do need to find a way to do it. We need to reallocate as was proposed. But if it's FY25, then we do not. And so that is why I changed Supervisor Taylor's items to information. I did not think it to be germane to reallocate funds from the next fiscal year and further reduce the levy when we're already concerned about the state legislature freezing rates every time we lower them, or to dedicate additional funding in reserves when current use of reserves is not required. And that was the only reason for that, is because, again, as I state in my agenda item, he's certainly willing to make a motion during the budget certification and remove an item or even vote against the budget, but to add another item and discuss something that is quite easily handled by a call to the budget director when it mattered, and discuss this for 3 weeks and act on it again and again seems unproductive to me. And so that is why the record is being corrected here. And if there's not going to be a ton of discussion, then I'm willing to move on.
I'd like to respond, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Taylor.
Thank you very much. The record's not corrected because what was just presented is not true. Number one, I never suggested lowering the levy. You can go back and you can look at last week's meeting. And I'm glad for that sake that these meetings are recorded. I heard that this was misproposed in Supervisor Ung's comments to the media that I wanted to lower the levy. That's not true. Look at the recording. The recording suggested instead of volunteering another $170,000 toward maintenance to the LAC authority, that we simply take that from that fund that we were volunteering extra and that we dedicate that. Why? Because I believed putting this on the agenda would allow supervisors to vote on this. And without allowing them to vote on this, it is going to come from reserves. I find it really curious, and I want everyone to go back and look at our discussions of the extra $400,000 that was dedicated to the self-liability fund. Guess what never came up? The LAC Authority's insurance. Not one time. In fact, if you go to the LAC Authority, you'll see media reports from Dennis Butler saying it's not in the budget. It's not in the budget. It's not in the budget. Do you know why? Because it's not in the budget. The $400,000, that wasn't for the LAC insurance, and I don't know why we would mislead the public to say that it is. That was never contemplated. You know what was contemplated during these meetings? A 62.5% insurance increase. That's why we dedicated another $400,000. This is coming from reserves, ladies and gentlemen. It's coming from reserves. It's coming from reserves. Do you know how I know? And I'll just ask Supervisor on. Do you know, because I did call Dennis Butler ahead of the meeting, he did request that I wait. And so I said, I'll put it on for information so that when we do act, as we could have done today, an up or down vote, he would be here. That didn't happen, and that's okay. But do you know what the balance, and I'll just ask Supervisor Ung, do you know what the balance right now of the liability fund is?
I think you're going to tell me.
Do you have any idea?
Not exactly.
It's negative $310,000. Negative $310,000. Are you kidding me? I will add up for you, and I'll do the math. Our annual expense this year is 1.26 million. Just add those two numbers, and I hope the people at home, I hope our public is doing the due diligence. Do you know that's almost $1.6 million? And you're saying that $1.4 million is gonna cover it? The math doesn't add up. You're short, guess how much? You're short about $177 or $200,000. There's no coincidence. It wasn't budgeted, it wasn't budgeted. It's gonna come from reserves. But let's not pretend to the public that the only reason is I was too impatient to be able to wait another week. In fact, I did. I said, I'll put it on for information, have the discussion. The rest of the board, and I respect the board doesn't wanna take any of those extra dollars away given to the LEC. But to say that it was always in the 400,000 is not true. It's materially not true. It's not mentioned at any prior meeting of this LEC authority insurance. And then finally, before we move on, I want to read to correct something if the LEC authority wants to. Supervisor Ung says, in my opinion, the fact that Taylor causes needless concern may be a reason he's the only supervisor who has not been invited to tour the jail construction site. I think that's embarrassing. I mean, I think it smacks of something that I would deal with my middle schoolers. I try to raise tough questions. I try to be fair about it and try to put the taxpayer first. But if that's going to be the tone and tenor, you know, you're not going to be able to, I don't care if it's our chamber representatives, folks in the labor community, our media, taxpayers who are concerned, that we don't want to hear any dissent. I don't think that's a good tone and tenor for this board. And so those are my comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. I will respond as well. Dissent is welcomed here. That's why it's on the agenda, even though I knew it would lead to this unproductive conversation, rather than taking it off completely.
By the way, that's a violation of our bylaws. So I did check with legal counsel because I anticipated that. Just wanted you to know.
What is?
To take something off completely, just because the chair disagrees with it. And you can talk to Joshua offline about that. But.
Okay. It's not saying that the 1.4 million is going to not be exceeded. It's saying that that is the bucket that is going to be paid out of. We can't guarantee overall that what the dollar amount of the overall budget amendments will be each year. As we know, we're 7 attorneys down in the county attorney's office, and unless we hire 7 attorneys on July 1, those budgeted funds will go to reserves to offset other expenses like this. The point is, the actions to be taken cannot be taken to increase the budget to reflect an extra $177,000. But the proper course is to communicate where those funds are coming from and communicate that they are coming out of the FY25 budget. And if they come out of reserves due to a budget amendment, that would be the normal process every single year. I would agree that it is embarrassing, the thing you mentioned, Mr. Taylor, but I would say it's for a different reason, and I'll just leave it at that. In regards to the Building Services LEC maintenance budget, I spoke to Kenny Schmitz about it, and I think he's been roundly complimented by both entities for his work and working in the middle of a complex and changing situation. The Building Services LEC maintenance budget covers utilities, cleaning supplies, tools, inspections, permits, not necessarily HVAC replacement major items, but programming. These things take a lot of care and attention, and as we all know, some of the warranties, the clock is already ticking on those, so those funds need to come from somewhere. And I think the board was right, 4 of the 5 supervisors were right to say that we don't want to touch those funds in particular among all the options given to us because of the legitimate expenses it funds and the fact that we don't want to be caught by surprise again with a lack of funds to pay for something that comes up. When a project is so delayed and so over budget, The memes just write themselves. And it's probably a good idea to err on the side of caution rather than try and nickel and dime every fund back that you can. So, again, unfortunately, our budget director was on medical leave, and some of these questions could be answered and disseminated at the time. Whether information or action, there are a lot of things communicated to the public from this board, and I still stand by the fact that waiting at all would be helpful. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I read from your email? The board has thus far allocated an additional $400,000 to this line item, which will pay for the $177,000 insurance and premium. Well, that sure sounds like you said that covered it. Secondly, I find it ironic to say that it's for small ticket items, $60,000 in HVAC repairs. By the way, you have an $8 million taxpayer funded maintenance fund eventually. It's $1.4 million now. So only in this kind of governance is that nickel and diming. And then finally, I don't need to beat the dead horse in saying that I have no regrets, and I'll continue to tell the truth and make sure that people know if there are misstatements. Thank you very much.
Incomplete truths result in public misinformation. Dennis, is it correct and accurate to say that the insurance premium will be paid out of the liability fund item?
For next year, yes. Yes. And, you know,
Is that, by you saying that, are you guaranteeing that it will be exactly $1.4 million and not exceed, it will not be $1.4 million and 1 cent or $1.39999.99? Are you saying that?
it'll be 1.4 million, that's what we tax for. To exceed that would take a public hearing on a budget amendment.
So what you're
we're
saying
gonna
is
have.
that a budget is a plan.
Yes,
It's not a guarantee that the expenses exactly match up to the cent.
that's true.
Okay.
You can take fiscal year '24, for example, that our property insurance came up much, much higher than we ever dreamed of. This is why that fund is in the red, not solely because of that, because of past years, we haven't raised the tax asking enough to cover the expenses. 310,000 right now, will probably be close to 400 because we got other expenses coming up. We're gonna have to make up the difference out of general sup, out of reserves. But if we'd have been taxing the way we should have been for the liability fund, we wouldn't have the problem we have today. Now, next year, the $1.4 million should cover everything. If it doesn't, we're gonna have a budget amendment. Who guarantees our next property insurance for next year that's renewable won't go up another 60,000 or 100,000? Yeah, we'll be short then. But how do you predict that? Nobody can. Melissa can't even do that. Our insurance agents can't even do that. And the more storms we have around, our property insurance is gonna go up. And nobody knows that answer. So yes, $1.4 million is all we have budget for. That's all we tax for.
So can you tell the public that you definitely know that these dollars are going to come out of reserves
For the makeup?
for the 177,000?
No, they are not. It's all $1.4 million.
So just to underline what our budget director just said, you can listen to the tape. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you very much. These are math numbers. These are from the person who really helps to manage the liability fund. These are fixed costs, by the way. All you have to do, an 8th grader can do the math at home. $423,000 for property insurance, $117,000 work comp. Those don't fluctuate. They'll go up. $316,662 liability insurance, $50,000 liability damages, $113,000 so far in legal. And I'm going to ask you if you know how much they're being paid every month from legal, because that's going to continue probably double. Right now, we have about $1.25 million that we know is coming. $1.25 million. How much did I say we were in the hole? $310,000. Guys, it's not hard. That exceeds 1.5 million, and you just heard someone say, well, there's not going to be an excess of 1.4 million. It doesn't work. I mean, this isn't funny math. And so we know that this is going to have to be made up. We know that the 177,000 is an addition, is yet one more thing. And it wasn't in the plan. That's the point. I know a budget's a plan. It wasn't in the plan. That's why everyone was saying it's not budgeted for. I want to belabor the point. In January or February of 2025, I guarantee you're going to be at a public hearing. It's going to have been exceeded. It's already in the red, 310,000. We know $1.25 million is coming. And you know every single month, $25,000 is being paid in legal just from our side of the house in support of the LAC Authority. So I don't know if people are looking at these numbers, but all you have to do is add them up. It's obviously going to be exceeded. There's no way it can't be. So I just want to make sure the public knows. Thank you.
Dennis?
Okay, I gotta make one comment. The attorney fees, $113,000 has been transferred over to the board expense because attorney fees for defending LEC, any expert witness fee should never be paid out of our liability fund. They were by error. We've corrected that, so any attorney fees and expert fees will be paid out of the board expense. Yes, we're gonna have to amend that, but that's the way it is. That
So
is
we don't
not
have
a
that budgeted right now is what?
What?
Do we have that budgeted right now from the board?
No,
Okay, thank you.
no, and we don't have the 36,000 for the pipeline defense either, so we're gonna have to amend the budget.
Yeah. I appreciate you clarifying that for the public.
Okay.
Any other board discussion? Hearing none. Item 14 from the Board of Supervisors is 3 items for information from Mr. Taylor. A is approval to reallocate $170,000 from the county's over and above contributions to repairs and maintenance not specified in the lease obligated as a maintenance fund contribution, and $7,000 in reserves to pay for the insurance premium.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think item A has been exhausted by our previous discussions. It's on for information again. I don't see how we're well-served by continuing the discussion unless anyone else wants to.
Hearing none, we'll move on to item B, approval to dedicate $177,000 in reserve funding to pay for the premium.
Again, this item is now informational and don't see any reason to belabor that point, but just to let the public know.
Any board discussion? Item C is to receive recommendations for changes to the Law Enforcement Center Authority lease with the Woodbury County Board of Supervisors.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This was, and I have to hand it to you, you were right on this. I was wrong in terms of receiving something into the record. I just wanted it to be for a future discussion to say a prohibition against new buildings, the project budget, the maintenance fund approval, the owner maintenance fund responsibility and roles and responsibilities between building services need to be clarified. I think that's in the record already. And so I didn't mean to belabor any further discussion, but just to make sure it was received into the record in case that wasn't taken up this year.
Any discussion or comments from the board? Obviously, the board has communicated, based on the comments from the LAC Authority, that lease revisions will be taken up once the building is completed, and I don't think that's changed. Is there any comment on the timing? So just so everyone's aware, these are not the only things that the county will be looking at. They are part of it, but the full picture is going to be something that takes place at a later date when both parties are willing to engage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Hearing no other discussion. We'll move on to item 15, reports on committee meetings.
And our certs board, basically is just kind of general business and moving along as far as the year goes, approving financials and a few contracts, but nothing really new to report on that. We also had a career day, which Dan, Supervisor Bittinger, and I both spent at Siouxland Community Christian, and we saw we had a couple deputies there recruiting the next generation. Seemingly a lot more people interested in law enforcement than county politics. So I don't know why, but a lot bigger line for their booth. But, yeah, it was a great time, and I don't know if you had anything to add on that, Dan?
Yeah, no, I had a few students that were interested, that were in the upper grades, interested about county service. But one good thing was the 185th was next to me, a pilot from the 185th, and there was a long line to talk to the pilots, and that was a good thing to see. Students wanted to be involved in the airline industry and or serving in the 185th. So that was just good to see. But had a lot of good information to speak to a lot of the students. They asked a lot of good questions about what is county government, what are the county positions, and how does the county serve the public. So that was just good to see the next generation be inquisitive of how they can be more involved in their county government. So that's all.
Mr. Chair, not so much a committee meeting, but we had the roundabout discussion, Old Lakeport, and had a good meeting. Mark, are you able to share a little bit as far as timeline? I had written down in my notes June to late July. Am I in the vicinity? Or mid-August, depending on timeline for the paving and then switching to the roundabout. But I just thought for the good of the public and the supervisors, I'd appreciate it.
I don't have the project timeline with me, but June is the late start date for the contractor to mobilize and begin work on the project. I can say that the beginning of the project will be taking care of phase one, which is the paving from the end of the subdivision, the north end of the subdivision at residences at Elk Creek, up to about 200 feet east of the intersection. During the time when they're working on that, the utilities will be moving electric, water, sewer, all of that in the intersection proper. So I think we alleviated the concerns of the folks back on the dead end. We have a 18-foot wide temporary access that's going to be serving them throughout the project. The contractor is also required by contract to keep the intersection open for emergency vehicles so that there's 24/7 access to the area for Sergeant Bluff Fire and Ambulance.
And thanks for your work on that in the cities as well. That was the number one thing, people coming, and it seemed like a shorter than previous meeting once they saw the access road. And
Yeah,
in fact, this is about a 6-month project, and then we should be back.
Yeah, I'm hoping we're done a little quicker than that. We want to be sure that we've got, there should be enough time margin to get this done before winter, so.
Thank you very much.
Any other reports on committee meetings? Dan?
No reports. Just the only report was with the Siouxland Christian School Career Day. So that's the only report that I had.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a quasi-committee report, I guess, since we're effectively quasi-creating a whole new department. With the medical examiner investigator issue, we have a lot of pieces we got to get in line by the 1st, and we have received, we're working on a independent contractor agreement with 2 individuals that have passed the required testing to serve as medical examiner investigators to help alleviate the burden upon collectively the county and Siouxland Pathology and the morgue and St. Luke's. And it's complex, you're starting from absolutely nothing. But we'll have 2 agreements for the board to approve next Tuesday to officially contract with these individuals with agreed upon rates and expenses and things like that. And then we'll work towards the questions on supplies, since that is a sort of gray area where medical examiner themselves is an employee of St. Luke's and so gets supplies through that. But the county deciding to go through the independent contractor route, we just want to make sure that we have some understanding of the items requested for either reimbursement or purchase, and that they're properly allocated to our MEIs. So fortunately, that will be done. Item 16, citizen concerns. Is there anything not already addressed on the agenda? Anyone to speak?
Doyle Turner, 2738 200th Street. I've been missing a lot of these meetings because I've been down in Des Moines working in the Capitol during the session. And I just wanted to give you a view that especially Senate leadership still has county governments in its crosshairs. Their goal is to strip you of power that you currently have, especially when it comes to wind turbines, when it comes to pipelines, when it comes to basically any energy source out there. In fact, Senate File 411 named every energy source you could possibly imagine. I'm not quite sure what their complete goal is, but I think in order to further maintain the your pledge to the people to protect the people, you're going to have to protect the people from state leadership. That's sad to say, but I just wanted to make you aware that the situation, even though we were able to kill a lot of bills down there that were really bad, I don't believe for a minute that they're done coming after you. So we need to be cognizant of that and fervently work to try and protect local government's rights. Thank you.
I think you would have appreciated the town hall we had in Lawton recently where we discussed the interesting dynamic that the House is the good cop and the Senate's the bad cop. And they're really, whether it's the pipelines or things like that, taxation of local governments, it just seems there's a bent there that's not very helpful. So as you're in Des Moines, Mr. Turner, are you given any more access than a regular citizen? Are you working as didn't you mention earlier, as like a soil and
I
as a
work with
lobbyist for
Free
some
Soil
Free Soil?
Foundation, and they hired a lobbyist. I'm not registered as a lobbyist, but I was working with the lobbyist in order to, and a lot of county issues did come up during that time. So
Okay.
anything I can do to help, I'm game.
Well, I would just like to publicly thank you and the other Woodbury County residents that have been almost living at the Capitol this session. You're not getting paid for anything any of the work that you're doing. You're incurring a lot of expense going down there, and it's all for the betterment of Woodbury County. So I really appreciate it. I appreciate the updates. I think I've told you this, but as I go door to door knocking for my campaign, one of the questions that keeps coming up is how is the state so disconnected from what we the people are asking them to do? And I don't know what to say, but it comes up almost more than county issues. So.
It really boils down to we have a very, very small number of people in leadership, especially in the Senate, that are in key positions that these bills aren't allowed to go through to protect the public. The bill that we had that passed the House by over 90% had a hard time making it through the Republican caucus. Well, that means that a lot of people are voting one way when they're in private and when the vote is secret, and they're voting another way when it's public. That's a real danger to our republic as far as I'm concerned. And the people should know how these people are voting all the time, not just when they're on the floor. So, thank you, by the way.
Thank you. Any other citizen concerns? We'll have to get you a Woodbury County, polo or something. Appreciate it. Item 17, any board concerns? Mr. Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So duty calls, I will be away for military duty next week, followed by surgery. And so we'll be out of the saddle for 2-3 weeks, or maybe a little longer, but we'll plan to call in.
You'll plan to call in for all of the ones you miss?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Radig? Dan, anything?
No, not at this moment.
All right. Thank you. We